Kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, no mai haramai. Welcome to this webinar on the Accountability Pact. Great pleasure to be able to host this, and you can see all the panel members there in front of you as you come on board. Before we get underway, just a few housekeeping notes. If you can use the chat as people are, just to introduce yourself and use that as a little bit of a networking space. So that's good to see who is on board. You'll see down at the bottom of your panel, there's a Q&A button that you can hit, so you can ask questions, put questions in there. That's the only way you'll be able to get through and ask your questions. So put that in there, and there's also a little vote up sign, the little thumbs up sign. So if you like somebody else's question, you can give it a little thumbs up, and then that'll rise to the top. So we'll get the most popular questions rising to the top. We have 215 people who have signed the Accountability Pact, so we'll talk about that a bit towards the end. But first of all, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background to this, where this has come from, and also just to give a few thanks to people who've helped bring it together. So as most of you know, we're heading into the time when great people and great minds are going to come together virtually for the UN Food Systems Summit on September the 23rd. And there's been a heck of a lot of work involved in the lead up to that, which we're going to hear a little bit about. Enormous amount of activity from NGOs, from academics, from the UN agencies, and then more lately from countries, from member states and private sector and so on. So there is quite a momentum building towards this UN food system summit. And as we were contemplating as researchers and academics who are working in the food space, and those of us working in the monitoring of food systems, thinking, what can we do? What's our kind of role in here? And really, our role is a cross-cutting one. It's one that will, I guess, try to hold the main actors to account. There's going to be lots of commitments being made, I'm assuming, on the 23rd. And how do we make sure that happens? In fact, how do we even specify what those commitments are so they're even measurable? And that's really the role, I think, of many of the people on board here who have been doing work in measuring and monitoring food systems and food environments. And so really this came about when a few of us kind of got together and thought we really need to start getting some of the activities that are already happening around the globe joined up, so that we hear about them, and you'll hear a bit about them as we go through. And maybe we'll be making some more connections and bring more people into this space, because I think it's going to be a critically important space. So I'd like to just first of all thank people that have contributed to bring this together. Especially like to thank Chelsea and Kelly, who've been organising that, and you've been getting emails from them. I'd like to thank IDRC, who's put in a bit of funding to be able to help to host that. So thanks to IDRC. And the program that we're going to run through in the next couple of hours, we're going to start off with a presentation from Lawrence Haddad about an update on the UN Food Systems Summit. And we'll have an opportunity to ask questions after Lawrence's presentation. So as Lawrence is presenting, and any questions that you might have about it, put that in the Q&A, and we'll put them to Lawrence. So I'll moderate that discussion. Then we're going to go into a series of presentations. We're going to hear from some of the groups that have major food monitoring programs up and running or emerging. So we'll hear from those people, and then we'll hear a bit from various regions from the African region, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Mediterranean region, just about monitoring activities that are happening there. I'll then officially launch the Accountability Pact, and we'll have a good bit of time at the end for discussions where we want to hear from you about how you feel that you can contribute and what is needed to lift this whole area of monitoring for accountability forward. So keep those questions in mind, and we'll have a good discussion at the end. I'm going to ask, as I go through, I'm going to ask people to just introduce themselves as we go through. So I won't do a whole lot of introductions. And as we start in the presentations, I'll just then ask the panel members, apart from those who are presenting, if they can just flick off their video so that we see the person who's presenting, and they'll share some slides. So let's kick it off, and over to you, Lawrence, to start us.
Thank you, Boyd. I'll share my screen. Hopefully it's the right presentation. So Boyd, thank you for organizing this. It's great. I wish I had more to share with you about the summit and its attempts to monitor its attempts to monitor commitments, but I don't have that much to share with you. I wanted to just talk a little bit about recent history. This is a piece of work that GAIN commissioned a couple of years ago for the N4G summit before it got postponed, obviously. And we were trying to, a lot of this is focused on business commitments, monitoring business commitments, and a lot of businesses had been complaining that there were too many accountability mechanisms for them to basically respond to. The burden was too heavy, it was too confusing, and they were all doing different things. So rather than take their word for it, we asked somebody to do a review. And here's one of the slides that they talked about, and it was in the food and nutrition space. And here's many of you are behind on this call are behind these initiatives. We've got the GNR, we've got ATNF, we've got Informal is there, and there are other things there as well. So there are lots of things out there, and that's just the nutrition space. If you go into the climate space, the biodiversity, livelihoods, resilience, you get more. Hunger, you get more. And the businesses kept saying to us, this is what it feels like. And I don't know if that really is what it feels like. My perception was that there was fairly good complementarity and fairly good alignment. But that's what they said it felt like. And I think that the challenge is to align accountability mechanisms. If each one of these blocks is a different mechanism, how can we align them? And that's why these are slides I did 2 years ago for this aligning accountability piece of work we did. So I was really, really happy to see Boyd and colleagues launching or deciding to launch this Accountability Pact. What do we know? What do we have for the summit right now? Informally, we have the countdown. We're calling it not the countdown report because Lancet don't want us to call it the countdown 2030 report. But this is a report that Jess and Kate at JHU are leading on, and it draws in science representatives from each of the science group of the summit has scientists embedded in each of the action tracks. And this Countdown 2030 report draws in the scientists from the science group from each of the 5 action tracks. And it's focusing on food system data, mostly national, mostly country level data from governments, mostly national, some subnational. But it's trying to pull together data across these different domains: hunger, nutrition, livelihoods, environment, resilience, the 5 action tracks, basically. I may not have gotten that exactly right. We were hoping to get it published in Lancet, but we decided in the end to go with food policy. And I think there's an initial publication coming out around the time of the summit in food policy, which basically says this countdown report. I don't know what we're calling it, Jess, you can tell me, but this is this report. We need to do this. This needs to happen every year. And then the other informal thing I know about, obviously, is this pact. Formally, what's happening? A commitment guide was produced a few months ago. I think it was modeled quite strongly on the N4G commitment guide, with lots of language around smart commitments. It feels a bit, well, feels totally incomplete because there was no mechanism for tracking the commitments that was specified. Recently, we just found out last week that there's going to be a commitment register set up for all stakeholders, including organizations represented on this call, but mostly for governments, businesses, NGOs, and research organizations too, to register commitments. I don't know what that's going to look like yet because it hasn't been built, as far as I know. The Deputy Secretary General, in her statement on the third day of the pre-summit, which was in late July, said there will be a stock take every 2 years. A stock take of what and who's going to do it and what will it look like, not clear. This morning I was in a meeting with one of these CEO roundtables. They've had 5 of them so far in the last year and a half, and this was the 5th one. And FAO and WBA, Victoria was there. I don't know if Victoria's on the line today, but Victoria was there. De Bourbon de Palme from WBA was there, and someone from the statistics group, I guess that's Jose's group at FAO, was there, and they briefly mentioned that they were developing something that was semi-independent, but there was no slides shared and no detail provided really. Just to say that the terms of reference for each action track that were given to us back in August of last year tasked each action track with developing an accountability mechanism. And the Countdown 2030 report was an initial attempt to develop an accountability mechanism that ran across the 5 action tracks, so that rather than each action track developing their own accountability mechanism, we try and do that across the action tracks. For whatever reason, the Countdown report was never latched onto as a potential basis for a formal mechanism. I don't really understand why. The politics is beyond me on that. But in the preparation for when we were developing the Countdown 2030 report, we did a mapping of, this is my last slide, Boyd. We did a mapping of accountability mechanisms. We said, what would food system accountability look like? And we had these 2 blocks. We said it'd be a lot of stuff around data, and usually it'd be sort of indicators at the national level, but there could also be data at a company level or a sector level. And that would cover these 5 different areas, from nutrition and hunger all the way to vulnerability and resilience. That would be general level data, but then there would also be space for a specialist deep dive. So the GNR would be the deep dive into data, global nutrition report in the nutrition and hunger space, and the Countdown and the food system dashboard would provide data across the 5 areas. And then there would be a separate module around commitments, and the data would be produced from 2021, from now, at the time of the summit, as kind of a baseline. And then the commitments, tracking the commitments, would happen from 2022, because, as Boyd said, we don't know what they are yet. So we would track those a year later, and then there again we were thinking, well, you'd be tracking governments, businesses, civil society, and other development partners. And again, we were speculating based on our knowledge back in October 2020. GNR and Informal seemed to be really important for nutrition and hunger, AT&I for food businesses, especially on the deep dive. GNR, Informal on development partners and donors and others. World Benchmarking Alliance, important for food businesses across the piece. But because they go across the piece, they don't have the chance to do the deep dive that ATNI does. ATNI has, I don't know, 250 indicators. Inge, tell me if I'm wildly off. World Benchmarking Alliance has about, I think about 50, I think, but they cover 350 companies, and ATNI covers 23 or 24. And as you can see, there are lots of question marks in the boxes. But anyway, this just shows you that why I'm so happy that you're doing this, Boyd. You're leading this effort. We need a strong mechanism to track commitments in the food system space. I think not just in nutrition and hunger. One of my big learnings over the last year is we really just can't. We've got to treat these 5 dimensions as indivisible, just like we treat human rights as indivisible. You can't pick and choose your human rights, and you can focus on one of these 5 areas, but you can't ignore the other 4. So I think anything we do in this space has to really cover these 5 areas, but making it cover the 5 areas makes it very powerful, but also quite challenging. And I think no single mechanism or organization can cover the whole, the firmament here. So basically just endorsing what we are trying to do here. Back to you, Boyd.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'm happy to share the slides if they're of any use.
Yeah, if you can pass them on, we will collect everyone's slides and put them on the website. Thanks very much, Lawrence. Once again, people, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A, and people on the panel, if you've got a question, just flick your video and your mic on and ask a question. But I'll start off, Lawrence. First of all, I'll introduce you, since you didn't introduce yourself, as head of GAIN and also leader of the Action Track 1, which was one of the action tracks set up in the lead up to the Food System Summit. So I was interested in what you said there, Lawrence, about industry feeling a little bit that there's too many accountability systems. I don't have gigantic sympathy there. It would be great if it was more coordinated, but with the huge impact that the food system has on our environment and on our health and on our equity, I think there needs to be way more accountability. So, but I think the onus is on us to try to get a little bit more coordinated, as you say. Lawrence, just can you just give us a bit of a flavour for, you've been running one of the action tracks, the one around food environments, and it seems to have started off in the kind of NGO sector and the leading it, and the UN agencies supporting it, but now it seems that kind of countries and corporations are rather coming in and taking the whole momentum. Is it being kind of taken over, do you think, from its origins, and now is it going to end up like other UN summits, which are a bit watered down in terms of what they're going to say or commit to?
Well, you're asking a very provocative question in a public forum, but I like to think of myself as a straight talker. So whether I am or not is another question, but I like to think of myself as that. It started out with great promise in terms of a solution summit and a people summit, and we between the 5 action tracks, and the action track 1 is ensuring access to safe, nutritious food for all people. And so we essentially dealt with hunger, healthy diets, and food safety. And the action tracks did get 2,500 ideas from all over the world submitted to us, and it was kind of a deluge. And it was both wonderful and horrifying at the same time, because you have to make sense of these 2,500 ideas that were submitted. And Jess was on the inside of that process, at least for the first 6 months or so. We really tried hard to boil them down into 200 ideas, and then we boiled them down into another 50 ideas. And those solution clusters are some really exciting ideas, and I think they will come through, some of them. I mean, for example, one of those 50 is an idea that Corinna and Jemima and myself Jemima Njuki and Corinna Hawkes and myself had around doing something like Global Health 50/50, which some of you will know, which is run by Kent Buse and Sarah Hawkes, which tracks gender equity organizationally and programmatically and policy for, I don't know, 200 or 300 public and private organizations in the global health space. Well, we're going to do, and Jemima's doing something like that for the global food space. So there'll be that's just one example of the 50 or so initiatives that are coming out, and that just happens to be an accountability one, which is great. As we moved into closer and closer to the pre-summit, I think it's definitely true that the NGOs and the NGOs, the countries became more interested. Let me put it that way.
That's really diplomatic.
But that's
good.
to be expected. It's a UN member state
totally.
summit. Of course, it's going to be. If the member states weren't interested, there wouldn't be a summit.
Yep.
So it's about getting the balance right. The member states have to be mobilized and interested, but they have to. And we're always striking the balance between getting bold commitments and powerful countries saying, no, we don't want any of this stuff. So there's the Secretariat, and Agnes has had to balance that. One of the narratives that's been running through the whole summit is that the summit's captured by the big corporations. I just don't see that. Mm-hmm. I had a Action Track 1 had a leadership team of 100 people, and we had maybe 6 people representing. We had one person representing the Consumer Goods Forum, one person representing Food Industry Asia, and then we had 2 or 3 people representing Sun Business Network. That was it. And so at the Action Track level, I don't see any influence of businesses. At other levels, I don't know. I'm not privy to that. But corporate capture doesn't strike me as, it doesn't feel that way. And I don't have any evidence of it.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good to hear, Lawrence. And it is, as I see it, happening around these clusters that are developing. It's kind of like coalitions of the willing, right? So countries which are particularly interested in some areas will kind of put their hands up. So hopefully the countries that do join in with these as coalitions or join in these areas will actually be really wanting to commit to something. Is that fair?
Yeah. The 2 coalitions I'm working on in Action Track 1 is the Zero Hunger Coalition and the Healthy Diets Coalition. Those are the 2. But there are 10 or 11 others.
All right, people, we're open to questions. Anyone on the panel or anyone in the audience in the webinar, just ask some questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep quizzing Lawrence till his time runs out, because I'm trying to find out what's underneath this moving fog as I see it towards September 23rd. Lawrence, what are you anticipating is going to come out of it? Tell us what's going to look like at the end of the 23rd. What are we going to see come out of that, and what can we as people involved in monitoring and accountability, what are going to be the opportunities for us to get our teeth into something?
I think you'll see. I mean, who knows? I think some member states will really come up with some really interesting new things that they will put modest funding behind. I don't anticipate huge amounts of money, new money coming into this because of COVID and climate. The COP26 is sucking a lot of energy and money up, and COVID is doing the same. And the challenge we have put to all the food system actors is figure out a way of getting access to that funding for what you think is really important. And that requires a lot of imagination and creativity. So I don't see a huge amount of massive new funding. I would like to think there'll be a lot of repurposing of existing funding. Subsidies that go to the wrong foods should start going to the right foods, the healthy foods. Efforts to reduce hunger that are emphasizing the wrong investments and not the evidence-driven investments. Switching. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about the need to realign existing investments that are either being ineffectual or actually driving things in the wrong direction. to things that can drive it in the right direction. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about repurposing, aligning, and then at the end, additional funding. And then we've also been talking a lot about new sources of funding. So what's the potential for impact investing and zero hunger bonds that are linked to climate bonds, things like that. So from the governments, I think it's going to be a real hodgepodge of things. I don't know. It'll be, some of them will just say we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and that they'll dress that up as a commitment. Some will say, well, we're signing up to a coalition, and that will be a commitment. It's not much of a commitment, really. Some of them will say we're going to fund new things, and then maybe at the margins they'll be funding 10 or 15% more than they would have without the summit. And then some genuinely will do really new things in new ways. I'm also hoping the UN is going to, I think the UN needs to be a big focus of any commitment and accountability mechanism. I'm hoping, UN colleagues on the line, I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but I think, and actually this is something for all of us on the line, and GAIN will do things differently as a result of the summit. And we're currently working on our own public commitment as to what we're going to do differently. And I think all of us on this call need to think hard about what are we going to do differently and what do we commit. And one of the first things we always ask someone who's monitoring other people's commitments, well, what have you committed to doing? I think that's really important. But I think the UN has to really change. The inability of the UN to work across its mandates is really mind-blowing. It's been one of the big learnings for me. And I think it's not really a criticism of the people, because I think the people want to. It's just that the constructs and the incentives and the governance structures just make it super hard for them to do that. So, and then in businesses, I don't really know what businesses are going to do. There's a business pledge, which is, 200 or 300 companies have signed it, but it's a bit motherhood and apple pie. There's not much granularity to it. In the Zero Hunger Coalition, we've asked companies to sign up to a Zero Hunger pledge, and there are 3 criteria for the pledge. One, they have to commit to doing something that's in the Ceres 2030. I'm just giving you this as a granular example of things I'd like to see other companies do. So they have 3 hurdles to cover. They have to sign up to something that is actually evidence-based and in a priority country, and actually it has to be a priority of the country, because the countries are specifying their priorities through these dialogues and national pathways. So that's the first hurdle. The second hurdle is the companies have to commit to abiding by 4 different conventions. One is the CFS Convention on Responsible Agricultural Investment. One is the BMS Code. The other 2 are the UN Global Compact, and then there's a UN business one as well. And then the third hurdle they have to pass, if we're going to accept them as a pledger, is they have to agree for their commitment to be publicly monitored and publicly shared and it'd be by the World Benchmarking Alliance. So I think that's a good model. Yeah. I'll stop.
All right. Now I've just got a couple of quick questions. We've only got a minute or so left, but Amos, you've got a question for Lawrence.
Thank you, Wade, and thank you, Lawrence, for this update. As parties and actors who are interested in holding other stakeholders accountable or providing the needed either evidence or advocacy for that accountability, I was wondering, just based on the slide that you shared with us, that even amongst ourselves, it looks like the space, as you indicated, is very, very crowded. And so we may have other actors questioning our ability to do what we are saying others should do if we ourselves are not able to, put our act together. Are we in a position to, align things ourselves to ensure that we can have multiple accountability mechanisms, but then we speak the same voice, or we have the same goal? How are we doing on that? Thank you.
And we've got just to answer that one. I've got one more for you, Lawrence. So short answer if you can, if it's possible.
We have to, Amos. I don't think we're that far away, but we have to, because we can't give duty bearers the excuse that it's too complicated. So we have to make it easy for them transactionally, for them to comply with the accountability mechanisms. And if they choose not to, then they can't use that as an excuse. So as long as we check egos and logos at the door, yes, we can.
Okay. All right, one last one, Lawrence, from Vivica Krak, talking about the commitment register and what we've learned from previous versions of this, especially the industry self-regulatory approaches. And she's citing the EU platform on diet, physical activity and health, established to address obesity in 27 countries, and then the European Public Health Alliance and civil society organisations resigned after 15 years, citing that the platform was not fit for purpose and voluntary pledges were ineffective. So how is this going to be different from the UN Register of Commitments?
I don't know. This was never set up as a negotiated summit like the COP. The COP is a negotiated summit. This was always, from the very moment, like most UN summits, set up as a summit where voluntary commitments are made. So they're all, by definition, voluntary. But I think all the N4G commitments were voluntary back in 2013, and I think the GNR did and still does do a pretty decent job of holding those actors to account. And it's not easy in the GNR context because some of those same actors fund the GNR. So really complicated. But if you're brave and bold enough and evidence driven enough, you can do it. But I do want to reiterate the point. I think it's really important that those who hold others accountable also have to make themselves open to being held to account.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that, Lawrence. If you can flick onto the Q&A, another question just popped up into the chat, so you might want to take a read of that and see if you can type an answer into that. That would be really helpful. So thanks for that, and thanks for giving that insight. And we'll see if your predictions of what comes out on the 23rd hold true. Okay, now we're going to move rapidly on, people, to a series of presentations. And we're going to start with Jess Fanzo. So, Jess, if you want to flick on your camera and your mic and introduce yourself, and away you go.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Boyd, for inviting me to present two projects that we have going on. One is the Food Systems Dashboard, and the other is the Food Systems Monitoring Project that Lawrence referred to earlier. So I'll explain both of those, and then looking forward to some of the Q&A and questions. So one is this Food Systems Dashboard that we launched in June of 2020. And it's all about using data to describe, diagnose, and decide on how to improve food systems. The dashboard was set up and established with a partnership with Johns Hopkins University, where I am sitting, and the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, where Lawrence sits. The team is made up of 20 people, 9 core organizations, and 6 partner organizations that you can see listed. And the dashboard, what it does is it curates a lot of different food systems data from multiple sources to give users a complete view of food systems. Users can compare components of food systems across countries and regions. They can identify and prioritize ways to improve diets and nutrition and environments and other outcomes of the food system. The framework that we used to build the architecture of the dashboard, as well as the monitoring project I'll talk about in a minute, is this food systems framework that was originally established in the high-level panel of experts report on food systems and nutrition. And it's been adapted a few times and has gone through some peer review processes to improve it. So what we did was we tried to map data on each of those boxes across this framework. We have many gaps, which I'll show in a minute, but data around drivers for food systems change and transition, different components of food systems, so food supply, food environment, individual factors that shape food systems, as well as the various outcomes that we hope food systems bring: food security, better diets, environmental sustainability, nutrition and health, economic gains, and social equity and inclusion. So we have over 200 indicators in the dashboard. You can see where they map. We have a lot on food supply chains, many on food environments, dietary intake, drivers of change. You can see where there's a big gap in consumer behavior. And the question is why? Well, what we tried to do is pull together data from around 40 different sources where data is available in every country. There's lots of data available in the United States on consumer behavior, for example, but we wanted to create equity across the dashboard, ensure that all countries are represented from low to high, from rural to very industrialized. You can look at the data in all kinds of ways through a mapping tool, bar graphs, bubble charts. You can look at regional data, country level data displayed in different ways. And you can also look through country profiles. And this is a bit of a mishmash, but it's showing you, you can download country profile data of a curated set of indicators. And we're moving on to what is the next phase of the dashboard. Right now, we describe food systems, but we're moving on to what we call our other two Ds, diagnose and decide. In diagnosing, we've created thresholds and traffic light system for around 40 sentinel indicators to identify challenging areas for countries' food systems. And we want to link that then to what's called decide, where we link the diagnosis to recommended actions that can improve food systems. And we'll be launching that later this year, so look out for that. The other project we have that Lawrence referred to earlier was the Food Systems Monitoring Project. And the idea of this project is to monitor food systems and their interactions with other drivers to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as other global goals coming out of COP and the Convention of Biological Diversity, et cetera. So we know that there's a big call for food systems transformation by the UN Food Systems Summit. This transformation is all about generating a future where people have access to healthy diets, food is produced in sustainable and resilient ways that restores nature and delivers just, equitable livelihoods. We are asking a lot from our food systems. So this project is proposing a rigorous science-based monitoring framework to support evidence-based policymaking and to guide public and private decisions and support those who hold decision makers to account towards this food systems transformation. We've brought together various food system experts from 27 academic institutions, NGOs, and UN agencies from almost every continent. We have Amos Laar on the call, who's part of this group. We have Simón Barquera, who's on this call as part of the group. It's chaired by myself, by Lawrence, and Jose Rosero Moncayo, who is the director of the Statistical Division of FAO. And the real roll up your sleeves work is led by Dr. Kate Schneider, who formerly worked with Will Masters, who's also on this call. So we're all connected, maybe a little too much. But this project is mapping out a core set of indicators to track and monitor food system performance. We have 5 different working groups. 3 are around the outcomes of food systems: diets, nutrition, and health, environment and climate, and livelihoods, poverty, and equity. And we are mapping indicator domains in those areas that you can see. So for diets, nutrition, and health, it's diet quality, food security, food environments, and policies affecting food environments. So very much Boyd Informal's work. Livelihoods, you can see poverty and income, employment, social protection and rights, for example. The other two working groups are cross-cutting issues. One's on governance, and the other is on resilience and sustainability. And you can see the indicator domains that we will seek to populate with different indicators there. The next steps are we are calling for an inclusive process that this group, we hope to expand the group and ensure it's very inclusive and consultative and transparent. We are going to select and track indicators to analyze food system performance and accountability over the next decade. So our immediate next steps over the course of the next 6 months will be to vet domains and identify indicators, refine the list of indicators to the highest quality indicators we can find across countries, and finalize those indicators to be presented in another paper in 2022. We have submitted a paper to food policy, which is under review. And that's really setting out this architecture, the framing and purpose of this monitoring project that we hope will bring new collaborators who want to be involved in the scope of the project. And I will end there. Thank you so much, Boyd.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Jess. Very exciting stuff on the horizon. Great big thinking coming out there. So really commend you for that. And I hope you get a lot of hits on your website then, people going and looking up their own country and the country index. All right, so that's a nice lead on then into Informus. And we've got Stefanie Vandevijvere and Gary Sachs who are going to present on that. I'm not sure who's going to start. Looks like it's Stefanie. So over to you, Stefanie, just to introduce yourself and then give your piece. Thanks.
Thanks, Boyd. So I'm Stefanie Vandevijvere, senior public health nutritionist, and I've been involved with Informas from the beginning. So I'm really happy to share a very quick update on the initiative. So indeed, as Lawrence already mentioned, it's one of a series of initiatives out there, monitoring for accountability. So the key mission of Informas is really to strengthen accountability of the key actors, so governments and the private sector, for their roles in addressing unhealthy diets, and then also stimulate recommended policy changes. And really, the aim is to do this through the development and maintenance of a global network of researchers, especially also young researchers, developing standardized tools, methods, and benchmarking indicators, which can be broadly applied. And then where possible, also increase engagement between actors based on the findings, and also dissemination of those findings. So this is really the framework which I guess many of you have seen. So Informas was actually established in 2013. So it's been going for a while. So it's driven really by, it's coordinated from Auckland. It's driven by module leadership teams who take on the modules and increase uptake, further develop them. And then there's also regional food environment research networks which have been established. So it has two process modules, really looking into measuring the extent of implementation of priority policies by both governments and the private sector. Then it has a whole series of impact modules, looking in depth at different components of the food environment, like labeling, marketing, consumer and community retail food environments, food prices, and so on. And then it has a series of outcome modules. So for each of those, there's protocols which have been developed and a series of indicators. And each of those modules have been applied at the global level. So this is really a quick overview. So there's about 60 countries who have implemented some of these modules to date. And it's a real mix, so a good mix of high, middle, low-income countries. The most popular module has been really the Healthy Food Environment Policy Index to evaluate government implementation of food environment policies. And the most popular impact modules have been food promotion as well as food composition. So there has been a lot of activity, but only a few countries have really implemented all of the modules. So it still takes quite some effort to really implement Informal's in a comprehensive way and implement all of these modules. And so Gary is going to present the food environment dashboard for Australia to give an example of what that looks like. So the Healthy Food Environment Policy Index has been implemented in over 40 countries. It's mostly the tool that countries take up first because it really gives a good overview on where the implementation gaps are in food environment policies. It also really points towards where the key priorities are for monitoring food environments, and it really establishes networks in the country to then take Informal's further. So what impacts has Informal's has to date? So the first one is really methodological advancements to really develop these standardized approaches and indicators, which then of course, contributes to benchmarking countries according to the healthiness of the food environment. So this is just an example of the food supply, healthiness of the food supply in different countries. But there's other examples where we have measured and compared countries according to exposure of children to unhealthy food marketing, for example. Also, some new tools have been developed to measure cost and affordability of current unhealthy diets. Another very important impact, I think, has been really the capacity building with a focus on young researchers. So there's a lot of PhD students involved, but also very importantly, the creation of some good regional food environment research networks, which has allowed for some snowballing to happen and really for these protocols and methodologies to be taken up by a lot more countries and partners. And then other impacts include, increasing accountability and advocacy, which has been mainly through the media, some public health awards, some new coalitions, advocacy coalitions, which have been established. But I think on this, we could still do a lot more in the future. And then Informal's data has also contributed in different countries to policy development, implementation, and evaluation. So there's a few examples on the slide. I don't have time to go into the details. So some future directions. So of course, we want to further increase uptake, but also repetition. So to really get the monitoring going and for countries not to only do this once, but keep on doing it in the future. There's still scope for further methods development, especially in tricky areas like digital food environments or thinking about composite measures of food environments. And then a very important point is to really also make sure that we couple this monitoring research in the future with bigger investments in communications and advocacy strategies to make sure that all the work we do is well disseminated and taken up. And Informal's is also currently working on incorporating sustainability indicators, as the focus has been mainly on obesity and diet-related NCDs when we are talking about food environments. But so we are working on sustainability as well through some funding we have and through the establishment of a food sustainability advisory team. I want to stress as well that Informal's, it's a growing, it's an open, it's an organic network. So there's opportunities for everyone to become involved, especially with the regional research network. So there's some research symposia that we are planning in October, November. So abstracts are due 10 September. So feel free to submit your work and to interact with the research that's already happening in the different regions. And of course, the protocols are available. There's also options for trainings and so on if you're interested to really implement some of these modules in your country. Thank you. So I'll hand over to Gary now, who will give a concrete demonstration of Informal's for Australia.
Thank you, Stefanie. So my name is Gary Sachs. I'm based at Deakin University in Australia, and so I'm just going to showcase what it looks like in a country like Australia, where we've been able to implement several of the Informal's protocols and to collect data on food environment. So I've got a little video just to break things up. It's just a 1-minute video. So. That talk, that video hopefully just broke up the talking heads at you for a second. Really, the food environment dashboard in Australia is a deep dive, as Lauren's called it, into just the food environments and just the nutrition components. But I think what it shows is that once you have data, there's hopefully some creative ways to display it. That data from Australia was collected over a period of probably more than 5 years, involving several research institutions. In putting together the dashboard, we just collated all of that data together. For other countries, they may not have that data available, or they may only have bits of it. I'm not sure how much you could see on that little video, but there's just a screenshot of the front page. I guess the most compelling thing about what the food environment dashboard for Australia shows is lots of red lights, which is, I guess, the message we want to give to policymakers at the moment, that Australia's food environments currently are very unhealthy, and so that's really the main thing it shows. The dashboard is designed for policymakers and to support researchers to have the latest data kind of all in one place. I guess the tricky part in putting it together was designing those traffic lights, trying to allocate things a red and green light, and really to showcase where the problems are and to try and highlight the attention of policymakers on the key areas for change. Yeah, so other countries that hoping to put together a dashboard like that, I guess it first relies on collecting the right data, and the idea of Informal's is to help guide that. The dashboard itself was very cheap to put together compared to, I think, the fancy technology to put together something like the food systems dashboard. The food environments dashboard was something probably cost us about $20,000 to put it together, and it would probably be cheaper if other countries wanted to replicate it. So thanks for that. We can move on.
All right, thanks very much, Gary, and Stefanie. We'll come back to some of those issues. I'm now going to pass on to Inge Kauer from ATNI. So Inge, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and present.
Yes, thank you, Boyd. And well, we have not launched the Accountability Pact yet, but I just want to congratulate you on leading this important project of bringing together accountability experts, but also I really hope indeed that this will lead to further alignment of accountability in the food system space. My name is Inge Kauer. I'm the Executive Director of the Access to Nutrition Initiative, and I will give you a brief update on the work that we are doing. ATNI is as Lawrence indeed described it, a deep dive organization focusing on nutrition, accountability and business. And our focus is on large multinationals, national organizations, national food companies in countries, as well as more and more small and medium-sized enterprises in countries. And we are focused on developing and publishing accountability tools that track the contribution of private sector in addressing all forms of malnutrition, in the end to drive healthy diets for all around the globe. We have 4 work streams. So the flagship product, which was established in 2013 when we started the organization, is the Global Food and Beverage Sector Access to Nutrition Index that measures the contribution of the biggest multinationals worldwide. Then we have expanded that to the retail sector recently, and we have specific attention for baby food companies, how they comply with the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, since that is such an important part to protect breastfeeding. Our second part are country initiatives, because we believe that although a lot of the agenda setting on nutrition and food systems might be global, the dialogue and action needs to take on the ground. So we are also focusing on country initiatives, spotlight indexes that measure the contribution of national companies in country, as well as a recent project that we are conducting with GAIN to provide a self-assessment accountability tool for small and medium-sized enterprises. We do product profiles in country that measure the nutritional quality of products that are on the shelf in country, and other specific nutrition projects for companies in countries. Our third pillar is the monitoring tools for third parties. We indeed believe that it is important to make use of the data available and to align accountability mechanisms. So our data is also being used by organizations like the World Benchmarking Alliance for their food and agriculture benchmark, as well as World Health Organization, for example, is using our data on formulation of products of big international food companies. We're now in a project to monitor the elimination of trans fat, for example, for World Health Organization. We are also providing data to UN organizations on compliance with the International Code of Major Baby Food Companies, and so on. So we really try to make our data available for international organizations as well. And our third pillar is around action research. There are many areas where it is not clear yet what we should and can expect from private sector. And there we try to explore the field and come with consensus and standards on what can we ask from private sector. And major topics that we've recently researched in that area are workforce nutrition, and also what can companies do to ensure a healthy nutrition status for workers in the supply chain, making healthier foods accessible and affordable, complementary foods, how can we ensure that it is nutritious food that is available for young children and infants, as well as what should be the response of the nutrition-related responses of the food sector towards the COVID-19 pandemic. Underlying all our work is the influence of institutional investors, especially when we talk about listed companies. Institutional investors, so the shareholders in the companies, play a very important role. And so with help of our investor signatories that are shareholders in these companies, we've developed the investor expectations on nutrition, diet and health. And these are backed by 71 institutional investors all around the globe currently. And these investors have assets under management of, more than 15 trillion US dollars. And by influencing companies and informing themselves about how are these companies doing on nutrition, they take investment decisions that can have a big influence towards healthier nutrition. On this slide, you see the areas that are the pillars of all our methodologies. So for each index, each project, we have a methodology. And these are the topics that are underlying our methodology. So we look at nutrition governance and management systems. We look at product reformulation and innovation. We look at accessibility and affordability, marketing, responsible marketing of healthy products, employee and consumer health and wellness, labeling, as well as engagement of private sector with stakeholders in support of public health and not contravening public health. And as I mentioned, we have a special focus on marketing of breast milk substitutes. We recently published our Global Index 2021, and I would encourage you to go to our website, access2nutrition.org, to see the results of this index and also the examples and scorecards of the companies where they can improve. For us, what is really important is that we encourage companies to commit to follow international standards and policies, and we make that visible in to what extent these companies are doing that. And also to encourage companies to disclose more on their policies, performance report and nutrition data, because that in the end leads to a situation where we can hold the companies to account. I'm happy to answer any further questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Inge. So people put questions, a few questions coming up there. Fantastic work that you've been doing over several years and growing and expanding. That's great to see. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Will Masters. Will, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Boyd. And thank you especially for bringing this group together. Really extraordinary use of the Zoom era to do something that would have been just very, very hard in the past, impossible really. You know, admiring your work in the group in Australia, New Zealand, in, you know, reaching across people in Europe, but especially bringing together Simón and all the people from Latin America, bringing Amos, Laar, and all the Africa group that I'm more familiar with, where I do most of my work, and the community from Asia and including North Africa and the Middle East. So really something that could not have been done before the Zoom era, and you've been doing this in an amazing way at an important time. And what I'll contribute is from Tufts University. So I'm an economist. I've been working on food prices, particularly from the 1990s on agricultural markets, agricultural subsidies, trying now to turn that to nutrition. So food prices for nutrition is about taking the prices that are collected for measuring inflation, for monitoring agriculture, and using those for a new purpose, for the aim of food system transformation. How can we do that? Using existing price data and marrying that with all of the nutrition information that I get to learn about, having moved to a school of nutrition from a college of agriculture. I moved to Tufts about 10 years ago. So this project called Food Prices for Nutrition is a 4-year effort just begun that's funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and UK Aid to build on a number of past projects. We've been working in this domain for some time, and it's joint with the World Bank and IFPRI. Its purpose is to scale up the analysis of existing food prices to guide how the food system transformation can be implemented in countries around the world. So our first major kind of data product, the result of the previous phases of this work, and then newly implemented in this Food Prices for Nutrition umbrella, is the result of the analysis to guide the SOFI 2020 report, and then the SOFI 2021 that just came out, measuring the 3 billion number who cannot afford a healthy diet. In addition to that, for this new phase of our project, we're working in a set of priority countries in order to dig a bit deeper and enable government officials and also civil society to act on this food price data in a more informed way. And we also do a lot of analysis of the food prices. So here's an example of that in our partnership with IFPRI, modeling the food system in order to understand how cost and affordability of diets changes over time. So how does this work? What do we measure? What we measure is what we're thinking of as a ladder of diet costs, and defining what was for many, many years, since the 1996 World Food Summit, defined as access, economic, physical, social access, saying that what that comes down to is when you go to your local marketplace, perhaps a periodic market in a rural area, meets only on Thursdays, if you go to a supermarket in town, what is your ability to acquire an overall healthy diet? So looking across all the main food groups that would be an overall healthy diet, can you afford that? And we begin with the first step of mere survival. That's caloric adequacy. What is the least cost, most affordable starchy staple just for a bread and water diet, or chapati and water diet, or rice and water, whatever the least cost staple is. Then adding in essential nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and macronutrient balance to meet dietary reference intake levels, upper and lower bounds for those. And then cost of a healthy diet recommended in national official dietary guidance. Then we also build in other factors that might influence access to a healthy diet, including especially meal preparation. That's a sort of new frontier for us. So to measure each barrier, we need to ingest mechanically using software all of the prices that have been collected to measure inflation around the world. So for global analyses, this is the World Bank's International Comparison Program, and that underpins a couple of papers, several others underway. Then for within country studies, there's other sources of price data that have monthly or even weekly variation, that have particular market locations, and that's this kind of paper about seasonality and about fluctuations across countries within time. So the nutrition comes in to match items to their composition and food groups, and then we have a semi-automated system to compute these costs of diet. So this is building on OptiFood, cost of the diet tools, diet cost tools that Informas did, and to automate those, to make them so that we are calculating diet costs to measure the systemic features of affordability over literally millions of simulated diets around the world. And then we compare that to income. So the current state of access, our central discovery through this project, if you will, is the idea that when you look across countries from the poorest to the richest, there is variation. So these are box plots for variation in diet costs. But what we see is that if you just go to markets and you're looking for the most affordable items, not the fancy ones, but just the most affordable things, that if you needed to meet needs at a low cost, is it accessible? Is it affordable? Is it available? And given the composition, are the nutrients there? You have to buy, if you're a low income person, you have to compete against higher income people. And so prices are similar for poor and for rich people in the same place. And across the world, this plays out as well. Poor countries have to compete with rich countries for the same items. And so what we see is a ladder of diet costs. Cost of survival, about 75 cents a day in US dollar terms. Cost of nutrient adequacy, $2. Cost of recommended diets, $3.50. There's variation within countries. There's some variation across regions, mainly because in very rich countries, dairy and also eggs are cheap. That's one of our central discoveries here. When we map against affordability, what you see is that poor places are unable to afford these diets that have similar costs around the world. And just caloric adequacy is still a hurdle for many people, not billions, but hundreds of millions. Nutrient adequacy, a hurdle for about 1.5 billion, and healthy diet, impossible to reach for about 3 billion. So this number, about 3 billion or 38% of the world's population cannot afford a healthy diet. That's something that is discovered only by large-scale automated calculation of these diet costs for the whole system, not one particular location, but doing the same thing for all countries, just like we measure inflation, GDP, other kinds of economic statistics. And this compares to other measures of food insecurity or poverty. If you think about the World Bank poverty line, this is much higher than that. If you think about the FAO's prevalence of undernourishment, this is much more ambitious than that. And if you think about food insecurity, as measured by the food insecurity scale, this is a bit higher bar than that. So the FAO, which is monitoring these other metrics, food insecurity and prevalence of undernourishment, now added this as a third dimension of food insecurity to measure the access dimension in terms of affordability in a way that we can do in an automated, regular way for every country around the world. So our most recent work to sort of contribute to the dialogue, contribute to the Accountability Pact, contribute to the Food Systems Summit and its implementation around the world, is to think about what are governments doing in terms of publishing these prices from which we can calculate, governments can calculate diet costs and affordability. So this paper will be online in a couple of days, and it tracks the degree to which governments are publishing item prices for their that were collected for their consumer price indexes. The blue are the countries that are already doing this. The red are the countries that are not yet doing this. And then we compare that to the international agencies that collect item prices for early warning systems to guide agricultural and food assistance. And so that's primarily the World Food Programme's VAM, and also USAID funded FuseNet, and also the FAO's Global Information and Early Warning System. And what you see is that's primarily in lower income countries, as you can imagine. So we are able to bring together these two kinds of prices and do the diet cost analysis over all of them. What do we find? About 3 billion. An overall healthy diet remains out of reach because incomes are too low to buy the things that cost the same for richer and poorer people. And so just when you look at the least cost items, they have this similar cost structure. So it's about income, it's about safety nets, it's about social protection. So out of the Food Systems Summit, we hope there will be a set of commitments and a coalition around social protection for nutrition, so that these perishable or bulky items that are more costly to grow can be afforded by all. So that's a set of commitments around social protection, safety nets for nutrition. Then there's also the agricultural and value chain investments that are needed to bring down the costs, as Lawrence mentioned at the beginning, to repurpose a lot of that agricultural subsidy that's been going to starchy staples and to livestock through feed grains, can go to fruits and vegetables, fish, and potentially also eggs and dairy. What we find is that adding sustainability to this agenda has relatively little influence because the least cost items are the least resource using. You can imagine that if you're going to do something at very low cost, it's going to use few resources. And the expensive stuff is the more emitting, carbon and methane emitting. The more expensive stuff is the more water using and land using. For most people in the world, including, I would guess, most people on this call now, healthy diets are already affordable, but they're often not chosen. Why is that? Well, because market prices aren't the only thing in life, and the whole Informas agenda is vastly larger, and the whole ATNI agenda and the food system dashboard agenda is much bigger than just food prices, for a good reason, which is that prices at the marketplace aren't the whole story. So here's some things that are other factors that matter a lot, especially the tsunami of advertising and marketing investments, product placement, ensuring that restaurants are located, fast food restaurants are located right on the off-ramp of the road, right at, near schools and so forth. All of those marketing, advertising, and product formulation issues are central to the story. So we have a food system that's been really traumatized, I can say, by COVID, and continues to be so. That's front and center of everyone's agenda, is how can we respond to COVID in a nutrition sensitive way. Also, as described by Lawrence at the beginning, crucial to understanding how the Food Systems Summit can work. So what are we doing? We're trying to make sure that these data and these methods for analyzing the data are available to everyone in a democratic, open way. So at Our World in Data, Our World in Data is the central way that statistics get organized for public use. The food prices tab shows you all of this now. Food System Dashboard and others have this now. The World Bank will soon have this as an official data set alongside all the other World Bank data sets. And then these country groups can dig more deeply. So a big project, lots of collaborators. Really appreciate the chance to participate in the pact with all of you. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much indeed, Will. That's a very exciting project, and I like that stepwise approach as you build up those diets. And interesting to hear how sustainability doesn't necessarily add a lot to that. Okay, now we're going to move on to some quickfire kind of updates. We want to hear from people who are just going to give a bit of an overview on the update, gaps and priorities around this monitoring for food systems and food environments in their region. We're going to start with you, Amos. So over to you.
Thank you, Boyd. Permit me to first of all associate myself with the comment from LS speakers, commending Boyd and his team for the wonderful work that you've done and continue to do. My name is Amos Laar. I am an academic at the University of Ghana School of Public Health in Accra. I lead the Meals for NCDs project that is currently providing measurement, evaluation, accountability, and leadership support to the Ghanaian food system stakeholders, currently focused on preventing NCDs. For today's interaction, I'm happy if you refer to me as representing the Informal network in Africa. And so my very short presentation, which is about 5 minutes or less, would provide updates on the work relating to informals that has taken place in Ghana, in Ethiopia, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, Tanzania, Burkina Faso, Benin, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, but also a new initiative referred to as the Food Systems Transformative Integrated Program, which is being pilot tested in Ghana, Rwanda, and Malawi. As far as status of implementation of the informal models are concerned, what you see currently is a snapshot of all the models that have ever been implemented or are currently underway. By far, the most popular of the models is the food epi model, which is a public sector, as you see here. Implemented in all the countries listed here, successfully done in Ghana and Kenya. The outputs have been published and they are publicly available. The two other popular models are those relating to food promotion and food provisioning, and they are being implemented in these countries that we have noted. In addition to these models, in Senegal currently, efforts are underway to implement the BIA, Business Impact Assessment for Obesity and Population Level Nutrition. And so they are assessing commitment, disclosure practices, and performance of companies in this space. Recently, Ethiopia has benchmark policy goals and actions for healthy food environment. South Africa would have, but for COVID, would have implemented a food provisioning model, which is embedded in their national dietary intake survey. COVID has forced them to postpone that activity. And so apart from the country-led actions, there are also, as Stefanie noted earlier, food environment monitoring regional networks. So there's one backed by the Meals for NCDs project that I talked about, referred to as FAN, so Africa Food Environment Research Network. And this network is mobilizing Anglophone Africa and publicizing the informal models and effort and encouraging them to apply them in their countries. Currently, there are discussions with Nigerians, Gambians, and Liberia to implement the food epi. In Senegal, a related network referred to as RAPSAL is mobilizing Francophone Africa. And in the table that I showed you earlier, you would see food epi being implemented in Togo, in Burkina Faso, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire. RAPSAL is helping or coordinating implementation of those. In Kenya, they recently implemented a recap project that is also mobilizing and facilitating implementation of some of these models in East Africa, so Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya. In South Africa, there are a number of initiatives. One recently led by Pricelet at WITS, conducted a 7-country assessment of readiness for sugar-sweetened beverage taxation in sub-Saharan Africa. Indeed, the outputs were organized and then published in a special issue where Boyd and then Tom served as guest editors. Those who are interested in these are publicly available, and you could fetch them to read. Apart from the Informal's work that is currently being implemented in Africa, as I noted, the food systems transmitted integrated policy initiative is being pilot tested in 3 countries. Ghana is one of them, Malawi, and then Rwanda. And this initiative, which is led by Rockefeller Foundation and IDRC, of course, with support from other agencies, is aimed at building a fact-based foundation for developing tailor-made food systems transformative strategies for those 3 countries. But there are plans to scale it out to several other African countries. And so it's an initiative that I felt I should also provide as update. With respect to food environment monitoring priorities, we recently provided a summary of those priorities as captured in the food EP work implemented in a number of African countries. And so the countries at the time that this was done that has successfully implemented the food EP were Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, and Ghana. And so I would have just fetched from that summary report some of the priorities as communicated in those national documents. This is too tiny, you cannot read, but I would just mention that the priorities are organized around food composition, food labeling, food promotion, food prices, food provisioning, food retail, and then food trade and investment. In terms of other priorities, we have recognized the need to repurpose or retool some of the informal tools to be able to assess, as Stefanie indicated, multiple burden of malnutrition. In settings where I operate, we have undernutrition as a big issue, just as obesity, nutrition-related non-communicable diseases are. And so we felt it was important to have a tool that assesses both or all forms of malnutrition. And so a team led by Kenyans with support from Ghana, Senegal, and some of Informal's members, including Stefanie and Michelle, are supporting the introduction of these new indicators into the Informal's tool. There are a number of challenges, but some of the challenges have already been communicated, and we are already finding solutions to them, introducing these new indicators to measure or assess multiple burden of malnutrition in Africa. The other issues have to do with our inability at this stage to use existing tools to assess or monitor what is happening in a major component of our food system, which is the informal sector. So we have to find ways of retooling, repurposing the existing tools to be able to monitor what is going on in there, which is a major thing for us. And so in summary, these are our baby steps, African baby steps, but we are looking forward to learning and improving what we currently have been able to do. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Amos. And might seem like baby steps, but actually you've been a real champion here bringing these groups together. So it seems like pretty giant strides from the outside, I have to say, in the work you've been doing around capacity building. All right, Tilly, you're up next. Tilly Karupaiah from Malaysia, going to give us a bit of a rundown on your view on Asian, where the gaps are and what's happening. Thanks. Are you on mute to just take your...
Yeah.
Okay. Go, Tilly.
Selamat petang, that's good evening, and selamat pagi for those on a different time zone. I'm Tilakavati Karupaiah from Taylor's University, Malaysia, and I'm going to present views from my across Asia, the colleagues whom I'm working with, and our focus will be on gaps and priorities. Now, firstly, as you can see here, the we did a search in terms of the number of activities that have been reported on the UN Food System Summit websites, and we see an overall 300 plus activities, and most of these activities are reported either on an individual basis or involving multiple country platforms. Most of these, much of this information should be accessed from these URL links. Now we consolidated the UN FSS topics, and we find that, I mean, as you can see here, agriculture and related issues, healthy sustenance. So across this divide, these were the various interests from Asia for the pre-summit topics. But much of the focus seemed to be from agriculture and related issues. And whether these are already part of the conventional structure of food systems is not clear, as the other speakers have been talking about. Now, food environment activities are critical to fostering a robust food system. And we look at gaps in Asia going by using the Informal standardized protocol. So currently we have about 14 countries who are Informal members from Asia. And you can see that more involvement from the Asian region is required in such alliances. Now, this is the, we have participation from the participation from 14 of these countries across the various modules of Informal, the public sector, private sector, food composition, food label, food promotion, food prices, food retail, provision, trade and investment. You can see here, it appears that the food promotion sector is the current favored assessments that is ongoing. That's because of the IDRC project involving 9 members. But the other areas that have been looked at are public sector. Now, the countries that are highlighted in blue indicates publications that have been come out for these various sectors. Now, it looks like in the Asian region, there are great opportunities to get more countries involved and to expand our network. But one area that we need to look at, which seems to be understudied in Asia, is in terms of food prices, particularly for subsidies for healthy foods. And this seems to be really scarcely reported in Asia, unlike the United States or the higher income countries where you have the SNAP programs to cover that. And just to give you an example, in Malaysia, the COVID has meant that government has given these kind of assistance to almost 40% of the population who are marked as the bottom 40 in terms of income. And you can see that much of this food comes from the ultra-processed products. And obviously, this has been ongoing for, this has been ongoing for almost a year or more. And it appears that there have been ample opportunities for the private sector for free marketing, I would say. But on the other hand, we see that despite the food basket programs having stressed on survival products, on the other side, we see this kind of scenarios occurring in Malaysia, where vegetables and fruit are discarded because of the impact of transport and reach and access to urban centers where most of Malaysia's population live. We are having something like a 40% rise in prices for fruit and vegetables. Now, when we look at priorities in Asia, we did a snapshot poll amongst our IDRC researchers, and of 10 countries who responded, 5 indicated they were not participating in the summit, the UN FSS activities, either in person or with their institutes. Now, from what we see here amongst our group of researchers, 4 areas receive great interest: food labeling, food provision, food marketing, and food composition. These were 4 areas that our researchers are keen to venture or collaborate with others to monitor food systems. And we look towards Informas for greater support. Now, but in addition, there many ideas were posted by our group, and I can see here that in terms of looking at layers within food systems, at community versus the macro layers, the food security that is of concern across across all our countries. We considered food security was a major problem because of COVID, natural resources management, the digital food environments that are supporting ultra-processed food deliveries, adulteration, food systems and supply chain resilience, which has been picked up by the other speakers, knowledge skills, so we can behavior change communication, increasing availability and accessibility to healthy foods, and food labeling. So these are ideas that came across from our group that we need future research and policy programmatic action to enhance and strengthen food environment. And this is what we in Asia are looking for. Now, okay, so with that, I thank you. I stuck to my 5 minutes. And this work has been contributed by all our project members. We are all, we are currently doing the IDRC TV project, and with research support from William and all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tilly. Great work across Asia, and thanks for helping to coordinate all of that. And now we're going to hear from Simón Barquera on Latin America. So thanks for getting up early in the morning, Simón, and joining us.
Thank you, Boyd, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am researcher at the National Institute of Public Health in the Nutrition and Health Research Center, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the gaps and opportunities in Latin America. And just to start, let me tell you a little bit of context. We are facing in Latin America countries the common challenge of NCDs associated with poor quality diets and high consumption of ultra-processed foods, as many other parts in the world, and double burden of malnutrition, still with very high levels of anemia and micronutrient deficiencies. And we are one of the most unequal regions in the world. There are scarce resources and infrastructure for NCD prevention, and poor knowledge about NCD and the relation to diet among the people. And the ultra-processed food market is dominated by multinational companies that have a very big influence on politicians, national chambers, congresses, and in the media. And on the other hand, we have a very active and growing collaborative network of public health nutrition professionals. We share the language. We have been using the advantages such as social networks and communications to share research and experience, and we have developed a community of practice. And there are now other sectors and actors involved in this network, such as politicians and champions and civil society organizations, and we know who they are. We talk with them every day, and we can identify champions in Argentina, Colombia, Chile, and politicians and NGOs, civil society organizations. And we have support from international organizations that are right now very interested on this agenda of improving the food environment and preventing non-communicable chronic diseases. It has political visibility, and decision makers are learning that potential solutions are low cost and can be implemented, and this is interesting to them. And we have now some case studies that we can show to make them more interested on the potential of these policies. Our experience evaluating the food environment comes also from participation from about 5 years in the Informal network. And as other groups, the main protocol that we have been able to implement is the Food Environment Policy Index, and most of the protocols that had to do with diet and nutrition, so food composition, food labeling, food promotion, retail, and food prices and population diets. We started with funding from IDRC, working with Guatemala and Chile, and that allowed us to compare, even within Latin America, some indicators, and this was very useful. And as Stefanie mentioned and others, the development is very organic and depends on the capacity, resources, etc. But for example, right now we have developed a toolkit to evaluate the food retail environment based on the protocols of retail implemented in 5 countries, and that will be used by UNICEF to evaluate food retail environment in other countries. So a lot of progress here. This is just an example of the level of implementation in 2018, in which you could see Chile with a high level of implementation in green compared to Mexico and Guatemala. And this was very useful in the window of opportunity of the government change to show the new officers the advantages and that it's really possible to implement these warning labels in other countries, and this helps us to implement a warning label system based on the Chilean one, obviously improved with taking advantage of their experience, advising, for example, children not to drink beverages with non-caloric sweeteners or with caffeine, in addition to the excess calories and other critical ingredients. And now this labeling is used by Argentina and Colombia in their initiatives, and they are very close, and they are discussing these initiatives in the Congress. So we have now 5 countries with warning labels in Latin America and 5 countries discussing these initiatives. We have some other progress. For example, we just published last month price trends of healthy and less healthy foods and beverages in Mexico from 2011 to 2018. So it took us many years to be able to identify the people with the training to do this type of works, and we have focused most of our work on marketing, digital marketing, quality of the diet, front of pack labeling, and the retail environment. One main concern before finishing is the industry interference in NCD prevention policies. These tactics of multinational companies are very aggressive in Latin America. We are a very important market, and we have a lot of collaboration, but also food industry is doing a lot of the same activities in other countries. And we think we need to expose and neutralize these activities. It's impressive that they approach you with brochures showing how high they rate in the index of behavior, international indexes, and you see how year after year they violate the codex, and we have in Mexico, for example, 50 legal actions from multinational companies against the warning labels. So other ideas to conclude is that we are focusing on understanding the food environment, but we still need to extend to other areas of the food systems that are less studied. Also, it is important to see that there are some mechanisms for intersectorial coordination being developed in Latin America that are interesting and probably will be interesting examples of how to coordinate the food system. And other concern is that there is no proper representation, we believe, of civil society organizations and academia from developing countries in the food system summits. And this is a concern because this put us in immediate disadvantage in the discussions that are taking place right now in the governments to implement obesity prevention policies. And to finish, just to say that the informal protocols, such as the food AP, are practical, inexpensive tools that can support monitoring national progress and commitments for transformation of the food environment. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Simón. I think Latin America really has shown how integrating across the region has been really valuable, and each one kind of leaps upon the other. All right, now lastly, we're going to call upon Nasrin Omidvar to tell us about Eastern Mediterranean region. So Nasrin, if you'd just like to turn on your video and your mic and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Nasrin Omidvar. I'm a professor in the Department of Community Nutrition in the National Nutrition and Food Technology Research Institute, which is a WHO collaborating center, and our faculty and working in the Faculty of Nutritional Science and Food Technology in Shahid Beheshti University of Medical Sciences in Tehran, Iran. I have just started, my team has just started a few months ago as working with Informals, and I'm serving as the leader of the team. So today, I will not have much of our activities with Informals, since we have just started and we are at the beginning of adopting, translating, and starting our projects with Informals. But what I'm going to present is a quick overview of what is happening in EMRO region with regard to the food environment, and from where we are starting our works. Eastern Mediterranean region, based on the categorization of WHO regional centers, it comprises 22 countries with a population of nearly 700 million people. The region is suffering from different nutritional problems, including persistent food and nutrition insecurity, and escalation in diet-related non-communicable diseases and obesity, in addition to micronutrient deficiency, which has already been existed, and depleted environmental resources, specifically water scarcity, which is now a major problem in the region. And basically, most of the countries of the region are food importers, except for Iran, Lebanon, and to a certain degree, Egypt. And so ultra-processed and processed foods are part of these imports, as you know. With regard to the food environment, certain policies have been started in the region over the last few years by the promotional activities of the WHO, including the fiscal policies on reducing sugar and sugary beverages through taxation and subsidies that, as you see, only 5 countries has now started it. With regard to decreasing fat and fatty products, that is one of the major problems in the diet of the region. There have been emphasized in reducing palm oil, hydrogenated oil, and trans fatty acids through taxation, and also removing subsidies. And 3 countries so far has started some of these policies. There have been some activities on reducing salt and salty foods by, again, taxation and some of the measures to reduce the salt in the major and staple foods, specifically flatbread, that is one of the main staple foods in the region, and also taxation on all healthy salty foods that are being used. And with regard to labeling, there has been some policies started since 2014. Iran was the first country that started food labeling in the region, but now there are more than 5-6 countries that already have their own labeling schemes, either as traffic light or health logo, mainly focusing on informing the consumers on salt, fat, and sugar content of the products, and also some nutritional information. The last type of policies that I wanted to emphasize is regulations on food promotion directed at children in the region. That is a major problem that not much countries have regulations on that. Oman and Iran have started some regulations for the last few years, and have banned marketing and advertising in kindergartens, schools, and spaces that are specified for children, and also have limited advertising on beverages and foods that are high in sugar, fat, and salt. However, there are many other types of medias that the countries and the governments have no access and no power on, like satellites in the region that are major sources of food marketing directed at children, and nothing much can we do about it at the moment. There's also a nutrient profiling model for marketing food to children being developed in the region, and it is very recent, so not many countries are actually adopting it completely, but gradually it is being adopted by the countries. Food composition database is a recent activity in the region that there is an effort to develop a network and gather all the data available on the food composition data in the region. However, there are major challenges with regard to the fact that there is a general lack of data on food consumption and dietary pattern at the national level. In the region, maybe 1 or 2 countries have their national dietary intake data on a regular basis. There's a shortage of accredited laboratories for analysis and absence of use of a regional network to standardize the procedures. There has been some efforts on developing national food-based dietary guidelines in the countries, which has been started since 2001. These FBDGs have been mainly focused on NCDs and high-risk practices regarding to NCDs. However, recently there is a move towards measuring the sustainability of the diet in the countries and development of sustainable FBDGs. Qatar is the first country which has introduced its sustainable FBDG with specific guidelines on the environmental issues. Oman, Lebanon, and Iran are on the way and are working on the sustainability measures. There are many gaps with regard to data and activities in the region. There is a high level of food waste with very minimum data. Like in Iran, we don't have much data, although there are estimations that more than 30% of the food produced and used in the country are wasted. Food price analysis is a new area that we are entering it, and we have, as I said, many limitations with food composition data. And with the technical help and support of Informal, we are hoping to start some new projects in the coming months. So we are developing some of them on food prices and as well as the public policy food environment. And I stop here, and I thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Nasrin. And there's a question in the question and answer for you just at the moment there, if you want to answer that. Now, I was going to just quickly launch the, if you can just stop share screen, Nasrin, that'd be good. And what I'll just do is, there we are. Okay, I'm just going to, just in 1 minute, because we're running short of time, just officially launch, if you like, the Accountability Pact. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, for contributing to that and signing up to that. So we are using this accountability model of Vivica Clark's to show the different areas where we as researchers involved in accountability and measuring can have an effect. We can have an effect on setting the account, specifying what we do measure, taking the account, which is the measuring, sharing it, we can be party to trying to hold the big players to account and responding to it. So the commitment that you've all made, and thank you for that, is essentially to expand the application of the expertise in strengthening this monitoring so that we can generate the evidence, we can translate the evidence and the advocacy to create this food systems transformation. And just a big thanks to all of the groups who have contributed to it, and especially to IDRC for helping to support that. So that's the groups there. All right, I'm going to just stop that now, and we will just take some questions. There's been a few items come up in the question and answer. If anybody has any questions, put them up there. If people on the panel could just quickly turn on their screen so we can, your camera, so we can see you. And I am going to, there's a few questions from one person here. I'm just going to pick out one of them, and this is around where the funding flows for this. And I think it's a really valid question about how much flows into low-income countries versus high-income countries. So I know that IDRC and Bloomberg Philanthropies and so on have a very strong focus on funding activities in low-income countries. People have presented from the regions. Any comments from people about that, about is the equity and the flow of funding towards supporting this? Anyone got a response to that? Amos or Tilly? Or Will, you've worked in these areas?
My video is not working because I've been shut down.
Oh, have you? All
Okay.
right, well, you can answer anyway, Tilly.
Yeah. One of the important aspects is conflict of interest, and I guess that concerns where we receive funding. And one of the, I think this is an aspect that should be looked at by individual countries in terms of the source of funding and all that, because to some extent countries do govern in terms of the funder. But aside from that, there is now a movement to look at conflict of interest, but most of the big funders that have been cited by some of us seem to be more of philanthropy rather than business interests. But,
Yeah.
So that's my comment.
Okay, thanks, Tilly. If anybody has comments that they want to respond to that, you can type it in there. Hannah Brinston asked a question a bit earlier on, which Lawrence has made some comments to, but it's a really critical question about how we convert this evidence into action. And we're researchers, but as I showed in that accountability circle, we're trying to be engaged in conversion to action. Gary, did you want to, from the analysis that you did on the Informal's work, ways that this can be converted into action or has been converted into action?
So certainly partnering with civil society is an excellent idea. I think the more we do that, the better. Specific ways, maybe it's too late at night, Boyd. Yeah.
Well, I guess the options, I guess, that we're all working with are engaging with civil society, and I think in Latin America that they're doing that, using the data as part of a whole social movement. And Simón, you might want to talk about how the data has helped create this social movement within Mexico and other Latin American countries. So there's that aspect, but it's also the direct way of taking the data to the politicians and those that can make the difference.
Yes, Boyd, I think it's very important to have the data available. the window of opportunity is not coming from us, but it's great to have information and civil society support just in time, in the right time for when politicians need it. And I think that has been the experience in Latin America. But having these comparisons and benchmarks and demonstrating politicians that these things have been done or can be done better in other countries is very important too.
Okay, thanks. Inge, you've been trying to influence financiers and converting your data into that.
Yeah. Can I add a point? Because that the civil society is different. I mean, we assume that all civil societies are the same. I think there are differences.
And big differences between countries about how active they are. Yeah. Inge, do you want to talk about using the data for leverage around financial
because I agree.
investment?
Yeah, because I agree. Civil society is key. Policymakers are key because they can step in with regulation where there are gaps, but also to try to influence the companies to go forward. And the institutional investors have a major role in mobilizing companies to do better by engaging with them, but also to divest from unhealthy companies and to invest in companies that provide healthier options. So I think it is all type of stakeholders that we really need to involve. And as Simón said, it is really important that we go beyond providing the data, but really making the data accessible and understandable for these groups to take action upon.
Okay, thanks for that. And there's a question about perverse incentives and subsidies. And Lawrence at the beginning talked about the potential for the switch in investment of subsidies. This is not financial investment as you've talked about, Inge, but also the subsidies and taxation. We've seen quite a mix from Nasrin around the EMRO region, some subsidizing sugar and some taxing it, which I thought was interesting. But what are the chances, do you think, of getting change in the subsidies, which are really do influence where the flow of investment goes? I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts or comments on that from countries that do those investments.
Actually, I would like to ask Will about, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, when we talk about subsidies, even within countries, to divert that money to, let's say, fruit and vegetables, you need to work across 2 or 3 ministries. And I think, I'm not sure how it is with different countries. So the intention may be good. Maybe one government agency is interested, but we find it difficult to work with the relevant people to get the right subsidy across.
So Will, you're the economist. Tell us.
Absolutely. No, Tilly's point is exactly right. That's why nutrition has been such a challenging issue. First, because of the rapid change in the food system itself, we're just now discovering the harms, and also the fact that addressing it requires something different. And I think that it's true that one is sort of disappointed to find out that the UN Food System Summit isn't going to be matched with lots of new funding, but it's also true that the problem is not something to be solved with expenditure, but much more the kinds of regulatory innovations that Simón and the others in Latin America have innovated, the kinds of intersectoral cooperation, collaboration that Amos described across African countries, and the civil society mobilization. And the one point I would want to make about equity in all of this is how the landscape is so different from when I started. I first did national household surveys in Africa in the late 80s, my dissertation in Zimbabwe, and then working across the Sahel, working across East Africa in the 90s. And the landscape today is completely different. What Amos and the Africa Food Environments Research Network is describing is something we've been working with in the Agriculture, Nutrition, Health Academy, where in every country there are dozens of really committed, very well experienced researchers in universities, in civil society, working in this space. That was not true when I started 30 years ago. And so we have just a much deeper pool of committed people. It's true that the funding landscape is wildly unequal, but in terms of the sort of human landscape, which is what I think at the end really matters, Amos is showing that the Africa network, I don't know the other regions that well, just really are able to mobilize on this regulatory agenda, as well as the civil society and coordination efforts that are so much needed. And the repurposing of subsidies is one part of that, but I think a focus on the dashboards and the regulatory environment is the big new frontier that we're just opening up now.
All right. Okay, people, we're out of time, and apologies for the shortened Q&A. We got a little bit of mission creep along the way, and chopped into that time. Can I just say that that's been fantastic. It's been fantastic hearing from all these major players what's happening around. One thing did strike me is that we need to engage much more with the environmental and the food sustainability groups and the food waste groups. So I encourage you to reach out within your networks and within your countries for those. We want to see what people have ideas about how we might strengthen this network and continue to engage. So Chelsea will send around to people a brief feedback questionnaire where if you have any ideas, put them in there. We have talked about writing a paper on this, and we plan to do this. What's the value of joining together these accountability systems? So we'll ask you in that feedback about key messages that you want in that paper. We'll ask you about things that you might want in terms of networking, and we did show earlier the regional networks that we're planning, and Stefanie showed that for Informus, and anybody working in the space is welcome to join in those. There may be other things that come out of the UN Food Systems Summit. We'll have to wait and see where we can grab it, but fantastic to have everybody together. Great to see all the chat that's come out there. There are a few tough questions left in the question and answer that we didn't get around to, like whether we're being trapped in the same business as usual paradigm. So there's some deep stuff in there that we didn't get to get our teeth into. But listen, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your input, and have a great rest of the day or the rest of the evening. And let's see if we can keep this this discussion and this networking going. Namaste.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. You're welcome. All right. Well.